Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast, where we discuss films from every genre. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back, listeners, to the 12th installment in our Star Trek movie review series. Today we are reviewing Star Trek Into Darkness. This is your co-host, Corbin.
And I'm Brad.
And this came out May 16th, 2013. Quite a few years between, about 4 years, roughly, since the previous Star Trek film came out. And to me, that's not that much of a surprise. I'm glad they weren't going to push for the 2-year cycle like they did with the older films. To me, this shows they were really taking the time to make sure they had a worthy script and a worthy sequel to follow up with.
Right, I agree. They took their time on development.
And of course, J.J. Abrams is back directing, and we do have the same writers, this time Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and we do get a new writer. He did do some of the story last time, and he was a producer, a big science fiction writer, who I believe he wrote Ridley Scott's Prometheus. He's a very great writer, Damon Lindelof, and he's actually currently adapting a new Watchmen TV series for HBO.
Wow, that'll be great.
Yeah. And the score, of course, is done by Michael Giacchino, who did such a fantastic job last time. So this may surprise some of you listeners, but about a year before the very first film was released, the new reboot was released, Paramount had such faith in Abrams and his writing crew and what their ideas were. They were already considering green-lighting a sequel, and the movie was still a year away from release.
That's pretty confident.
That's incredibly confident, and it did pay off. So, of course, as soon as Star Trek came out and it did gangbusters at the box office, it got 4 Academy Award nominations. It blew everyone's mind with how incredible this reboot, reimagining was of the Star Trek franchise. They said, yes, go ahead and do a sequel, and they gave them an extra $40 million.
Wow. I mean, sometimes you just know when you've got a hot franchise and a great group of actors and everything on your hand.
Absolutely. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind that they would be getting a sequel to the 2009 Star Trek. And like I said, they gave them a budget of $190 million, astronomical numbers considering Paramount was so stingy to begin with, and they were giving them these little meager budgets of $30 million. And
Right.
They were always extremely concerned about going over budget, and they kept trying to find ways to cut the budget and make it look cheaper. But you could tell this large of a budget paid off. It's kind of funny to think about these two films, respectively, came out in 2009 and 2013, and look at the visual effects. I mean, some movies coming out today don't even have this kind of visual effects.
Pretty amazing.
And it did make it to the Oscars. This was another Oscar-nominated film, and of course it was nominated for Best Visual Effects. It's hard to believe it didn't win because they're just incredible. One of the things that I really found to be fascinating was, as we discussed in the previous podcast of a review for Star Trek, and if you haven't listened to that one yet, you're definitely going to want to listen to that one first before this one, because like I said, this is a sequel to that film, and of course we have reviewed the previous 10 Star Trek films, so all of that is in the link in the description below, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Follow us here on the podcast, wherever you're listening at, and on Facebook and Twitter. And also, if you do want to support us financially, head on over to our Patreon page, where for the price of a Starbucks cup of coffee, you get great bonus content, including our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, bonus podcasts, commentaries, all kinds of great stuff over there. And of course, don't forget to follow us on YouTube, because we do great videos over there as well. We not only movie reviews, but also analysis of films, where we really break down and explain films. That's all a part of giving you a guide to the silver screen. Once again, all of that is in the link in the description below. Very easy for you to find. We made it really user-friendly for you to go back and listen to previous reviews in the archives and find us and connect with us on different platforms as well. So as I was saying, Leonard Nimoy is a major part of the previous film, and he really thought that was probably going to be his final Trek film. He would go out in a really cool, unique way. So originally, he didn't have any plans for returning to this sequel, but as we found out, he does return. It's in a small part, and I could understand because he was quite old at this time. He probably didn't want to be doing too much on set because he did quite a bit of work with the previous film. But once again, I don't think they really needed to incorporate him too much. I think they used him for just the right amount, a really nice callback.
Yeah, I agree. It was well played. Just that nice little touch there. And it made sense in the script.
So with Nimoy possibly not returning and his incorporation being received so well back into the series, J.J. Abrams did consider asking William Shatner to come back.
Interesting.
I don't even know how that would really work, per se. They would have to radically rewrite the script that we currently have to bring him back in time, unless he's not reprising his role of Captain Kirk, which I don't think that would have made any sense.
Yeah, that's the only role he could play, I think.
That's really the only role he could play and be appreciated.
He's too iconic. Yeah.
He really is. So once again, it was just a thought, and he didn't follow through with it. There was never any discussions. It was just a thought JJ floated of, we brought Spock back. That was great. What if young Kirk meets old Kirk?
That would be kind of cool.
It would be kind of cool.
It would have to be in the right script or it would really get hokey. You can overdo something.
Well, and that's exactly how we felt with Star Trek Generations.
Exactly.
Bringing Kirk back at the end of that film. You can hear more of our thoughts in our review. So not only was it Nimoy not sure if he was going to return, but even getting J.J. Abrams back to direct was a little murky, mostly because the script writers were taking so long to formulate a script because they really wanted to make sure that they did it right. And they were thinking, goodness gracious, this is the 12th film in the franchise. What hasn't been done so far, or what's not original? Because I would see they have a very difficult task. They thought all of these ideas had been exhausted, so they really did take the time, and that's why you could see it took them roughly 4 years to get this all together. And Paramount said that they were expecting this movie to be released, I think, in 2011. They were going to do that 2-year cycle, push it out 2 years, and then they said, well, we're not really ready yet, so they pushed it back to 2012. And then ultimately, as you know, it came out in 2013. So originally, our villain, who is portrayed by Benedict Cumberbatch, he was not originally going to be in the film. Originally, there were early talks to have Benicio del Toro be a villain.
That's fascinating to me. I really like Benny del Toro as an actor, but that now, having seen the movie, that would have really changed the feel.
It definitely would have changed the feel. He would have had to have portrayed a completely different character.
He's a great actor. He probably could have done it, but I think Benedict was a great choice.
I think Benedict was a great choice as well. But if we ever do get another Trek film in the future, I'm thinking Benny del Toro could be a good option to return to.
Be a good option, you bet.
One of the things that they also had a bit difficulty with was coming up to a title for the film. Of course, they just went the very, plain evocative route of calling their reboot Star Trek, which I thought was a great idea. But then they thought, we can't name this film Star Trek II.
Right.
Because there already is a Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Right.
And J.J. Abrams didn't want to get back into the numbering scheme because that would get very confusing. And other franchises have done it, and it just boggles the mind. The one that I can think of for reference, listeners, is the Halloween franchise, where we have 3 films called simply Halloween and 2 films called Halloween 2.
Yeah, that gets real confusing.
It gets really confusing, and it's very unimaginative. which most of those movies are very unimaginative. You can see why
Yeah.
they're not very complicated. But nevertheless, I'm glad they didn't go down this really weird, confusing route of calling it that. And one of the interesting things is they never wanted to put a colon into the title because Star Trek Generations, First Contact, Insurrection,
Sure.
there was that literal colon placed within the title. And they didn't want that. So this movie doesn't have a colon, but they simply decided to call the film Star Trek Into Darkness. I think it's a fine title, but as far as ranking titles goes, it's towards the bottom for me, considering The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock,
Right.
First Contact, Insurrection. I think those are better titles.
Yeah, titles are always an intriguing thing. In my own process as a writer, I've learned that one of the pieces of advice I've gotten is that titles write themselves. That you've written your title when you're writing a particular piece of work. You've written the title over. Don't title it first. Title it last. And you've written it over and over. Now go back and look at your work and what rises to the top. And who knows what process they use. That's just, I find fascinating.
That is a good process. They didn't really break down the process they used. The one thing that I will say, though, is Into Darkness feels a little generic. And at the same time, I'm not sure if it's necessarily warranted by the film that we got. I was trying to give it some real thought after watching the movie and thinking, okay, what darkness did they really go into? And there are dark elements, but to me, that's one thing I've never been too keen on is the subtitle.
Yeah, it was a challenging one, and it did intrigue me because before we watched the film, it was like, what are they going to find that's so dark?
Yeah. Well, the film was given a great budget, and no surprise here, domestically it grossed $228.7 million in the foreign markets, $238.6 million for a worldwide total, and it did outgross the previous film. It did even better, with a worldwide total of $467.3 million. Of course, the previous films could have never even imagined making that kind of money.
Amazing numbers.
For opening weekend, no surprise, number one at the box office with a very impressive $70 million. Although, if I'm not mistaken, this number is very similar to the previous film, which surprises me. It wasn't a little higher of an opening weekend. Still very good and clearly incredibly profitable overall. Now, the top five for that weekend was, of course, Star Trek, and then Iron Man 3, then The Great Gatsby, Pain and Gain, and The Croods. Now, as far as the rank in the series, box office-wise, adjusting for inflation, it is the fourth highest grossing in the series, which is still very impressive, but some of those very early Star Trek films, once you adjust for inflation, they did technically gross more money domestically.
Right.
Now, comparing it with critics and user score of the previous film, this film has great scores across the board, and it's actually very similar to its predecessor. So currently on IMDb, it holds a very high 7.7, whereas the previous film was an even higher 7.9, but not too far off. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 84% approval rating. The last film had a 94%. This film has a 72 on Metascore. The previous, an 82. It's kind of funny. You can see there's a difference of 10.
Slight,
yeah. And according to CinemaScore, audiences gave it an A, the exact same score. So audiences really liked it just as much as they did the previous film. Before we get too far into talking about the film, one of the cool things that Abrams wanted to note was the cold opening, where it's this really fun, intense action scene. Abrams has always been a real student of Steven Spielberg. He was always kind of his idol and inspiration for movie making. So he said, let's open this movie kind of like how Spielberg opened Raiders of the Lost Ark, with this really great action scene that pulls the viewer in, and it doesn't necessarily have anything really to do with the rest of the movie except in a kind of slight way. So he kind of really wanted to capture that cold opening as a homage to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Listeners, if you haven't seen Star Trek Into Darkness and you don't want the film spoiled for you, then go ahead and click pause right now. Go watch the film and come back and click play, and we will be ready to talk about all of the juicy spoilers of this Star Trek film. Ever the carefree, headstrong leader, James T. Kirk, reprised by Chris Pine, finds himself removed from captain of the Enterprise for violating the Prime Directive. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure causes a man to blow himself up along with a secret Starfleet data archives in order to save his daughter's life from an incurable disease. This explosion triggers the heads of Starfleet to convene in one central location, which make them easy targets. This mysterious figure, they identify as Starfleet officer John Harrison, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, attempts a total assassination on Starfleet Command. He succeeds in murdering Admiral Pike, reprised by Bruce Greenwood. Kirk, out for blood, asks the head of Starfleet, Marcus, played by Peter Weller, to go to the edge of the Klingon neutral zone and blast Harrison to smithereens. Marcus complies. But Spock, reprised by Zachary Quinto, persuades Kirk it isn't moral to kill a man, especially a Starfleet officer, without a trial. So, Kirk, Spock, and Uhura, reprised by Zoe Saldana, go to the Klingon homeworld Kronos, which is the first time we have ever seen it.
Yeah.
They go to the homeworld Kronos to apprehend Harrison. A battle ensues against the Klingons, but Harrison defeats them all, except he surprisingly surrenders to Kirk when he realizes the Enterprise has 72 missiles pointed right at him. Oh, and the Enterprise is stranded outside of Kronos due to the ship's warp core failing. Once on board, Kirk learns from Harrison just what these missiles are. They are actually housing people. See, Harrison isn't actually who he says he is. He is a 300-year-old man who was awoken from hypersleep by Marcus to develop advanced technology. Harrison knows how to do all of this because he is a genetically modified superhuman known as none other than Khan Noonien Singh. Before they realize it, Marcus has traveled to meet the Enterprise, not to help, but to destroy it, because he doesn't want word getting out about Khan and his crew, and he also secretly wanted them to accidentally start an all-out war with the Klingons. In order to stop Marcus, Khan and Kirk must unwillingly team up to take down his Juggernaut ship. The two succeed, but after double-crossing Khan, he double-crosses them and sets a course to destroy Starfleet. With the Enterprise in even worse shape after taking a beating from Marcus's ship, the Enterprise is free-falling into the Earth's atmosphere when Kirk realizes the only way to save his crew is to sacrifice himself by going into heavy radiation and realigning the warp core. He succeeds, but at cost to his life. Spock, enraged by Kirk's death, chases Khan to Earth's surface, where he successfully defeats and apprehends Khan, where he is put back into cryosleep. Meanwhile, Kirk is revived with the use of Khan's blood. He is reinstated as captain of the Enterprise as credits roll. One of the best things I think they do with this film is they make the story much tighter and cleaner and easier to follow.
Yes, I agree. Very well written in that regard.
Although I really do love the plot from the last film, and don't get me wrong, this is still a very heavy plot. And I say that because the previous Star Trek films have been, with their plots, they've almost been like baby food. They've already been pre-mashed up for us to
that's right.
easily digest. This film is not going to really spoon feed anything to you. It's a smart science fiction film with a plot that you're going to have to pay attention to in order to follow, because one thing I really do love about these films is kind of the chain reaction of the writing, where this man in London has a daughter who's dying. Khan knows his blood is able to save her, so he persuades this man to blow himself up, which causes the heads of Starfleet to convene, which gives him an opportunity to make an assassination attempt. and Pike dies, and they have to go to the Klingon homeworld. And I really love how just that smart writing of one thing leads into another.
Yeah, I think that's probably maybe where they were. Maybe that's where they were thinking about the darkness, into darkness, because Khan's mind is pretty dark in what he's willing to do.
Absolutely. And also the head of Starfleet is willing to...
He's pretty dark too himself when he's willing to engage all out war and
he
whatever
is.
It takes for revenge.
He is. He's merciless. He is wanting to start a war with the Klingons first.
Right.
And he's willing to
break all of Starfleet's, moral commands.
He is absolutely immoral, and he's willing to murder 72 people that are inside of these missiles. But then once again, you have Khan who, he cons people.
Yeah.
He uses them to his own advantage.
Yeah.
There's that kind of fun line in Kirk where they're on Marcus's ship, and it's Kirk and Scotty, and he said, wait, we're supposed to stun Khan? I thought we were helping him. And Kirk said, I'm pretty sure we're helping him. Yeah.
I thought he was supposed to help us. And he says, I'm pretty sure we're helping him.
Yeah.
That was really
good.
We
thought he was supposed to help us. Yeah. And kind of that witty banter is back with everyone.
Right.
And everybody just comes back into their roles so well. I was so impressed with everyone's acting once again. And of course, I really liked Benedict Cumberbatch as the villain this time. I would say he is a better villain than last time.
I would agree with that. And I'll tell you who else that really makes this film for me in great part. I love Scotty's role. I just think Simon Pegg just does that so well. Love his humor. I love his banter against that little guy that's always following him around, whatever that little creature is. He's just really good.
And I do appreciate they have found ways to use these characters better than they ever were used in the original films.
Exactly.
And that was something that was always disappointing, is they really struggled to figure out how can we use everyone in a meaningful way in the other films. And sometimes they kind of succeeded, but this is much better.
Much better.
Because we have Uhura speaking face to face with a Klingon and stabbing him in the leg.
Great. That's pretty great drama right there.
Yeah. And as you said, Scotty has been really central. They really made him a central figure to these movies. He commands, I would say, a lot much more respect than he did in the previous films. And even Chekhov is kind of funny trying to run around. Sulu had a much bigger role in the first film. So from what I recall, Sulu isn't used as much. And I like how McCoy was on the bridge often, where him and Spock together saying, "Oh, you're a real comfort," and just all these kind of dialogue with each other.
Yeah, for those of us who are really big fans of the original TV series and everything, you see these characters coming to life in such a more prominent role that really feels good, because in the original series they were all great characters that always felt underutilized a little.
And once again, I think the score is really incredible.
The score's amazing.
Probably the best score we've ever gotten for a Star Trek film.
Yeah.
And I'm a little surprised the film wasn't nominated for sound editing or sound design, because, oh my goodness, when we were sitting there, the surround sound was incredible.
Yeah, it was very good.
How the basses were properly used and all of the rear channels came together. All of the sounds had just such a vibrancy and reality to them that I was really engrossed with the score and sound of this film. The other thing that I really appreciate is the character arcs are very much earned in this movie, especially towards the end when Kirk does sacrifice himself, because that's kind of alluded to earlier on, where you can tell that Kirk and Pike kind of have a father and son relationship. And Pike cares about Kirk, but he's like, I'm not going to let you throw your life away because you're reckless and you think you're above the rules, and you can never, there's nothing you can't win at. So I really do like Kirk still is very much this kind of, like I said, headstrong, cocky guy in the beginning. And he's never really had to face any really serious life issues. except when Pike does die, which I was pretty surprised when Pike died.
That was very poignant.
It was very poignant, and the emotion that Chris Pine portrayed in that scene,
excellent,
just facial emotions, was really incredible.
Yeah,
and how that wraps around, like I said, to the very end, where kind of without a thought, Kirk is like, "I'm going to die right now," but and it kind of plays into him where he's like, ask questions later. We're going to go for it now, and so. He does. He sacrifices himself.
Right.
And of course it is a twist because in The Wrath of Khan, it was Spock.
Yeah, it was just a role reversal, complete role reversal.
Yeah, it was a role reversal. And in the previous one, it was Spock who mind melded with Bones and knocked him out.
Right.
But this time, Kirk and Scotty do have a great relationship. They always team up with. So it was Kirk who kind of had to knock Scotty out and go into that warp core, which was great. Now, I did love your reaction once you realized that Benedict Cumberbatch was not playing John Harrison. He was actually playing Khan.
Yeah, that took me by surprise. I didn't expect that. That just, it was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? I loved that.
I loved it too, especially
because he is the most iconic. I mean, he's the greatest villain. Always has been for me.
He really is.
The Khan character, I mean.
Khan is the most iconic Star Trek villain, easily the best Star Trek villain. And the one thing that I appreciated was they weren't even going to try and be like Ricardo Montalban's Khan.
Right, yeah.
Right.
That would have really cheapened it, I think.
It would have.
Do something totally new here.
And they did, thankfully. They thankfully gave Khan... it had a similar backstory, but he was incredibly different, and the whole way they came about addressing Khan and finding him. So it was a large red herring because we're told immediately in the first act, this is a Starfleet officer named John Harrison, and they did keep that under wraps. People were wondering, well, this is Star Trek 2. Are they going to bring back Khan? They really kept it under wraps. And I remember the first time I saw it, I thought it was cool, even though I appreciate it much more now after seeing and really reviewing with my SSG goggles on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. So I really did like Benedict Cumberbatch's performance. And that is one thing that I think they did fairly well in this, except I think they could have been a little bit better. Is one of my complaints with The Wrath of Khan was I hadn't seen that TV episode, which came out like 10 years before, and I didn't really know who Khan was. I didn't even know he was in the original TV show for that episode.
So when you watched that original #2 movie, you didn't know about that episode, is what you're saying.
Right, I didn't. Yeah. And you can hear more of my thoughts in full in the podcast, but I think they could have done a better job at introducing that character, and that's what they did here.
Right.
They introduced him in a unique way without all of the baggage of what you would have had to have known to really fully know the character in the original film. So I did appreciate he had a really different backstory, and it served the purpose of the film. Although I think I left the film not completely certain why these 300-year-old people, why there's 72 of them and they were in cryosleep. We do get a little bit of that, but I guess I have enough background knowledge of all of the characters to really get it, so I didn't think about it too much. But I do think they probably could have spent just a bit more time or wove that in a little deeper with the backstory of Khan and his other people.
Yeah, I found myself kind of asking internal questions about the why 72. That's such an odd number, But in what was their total backstory? That left me wondering. But it also makes me wonder if there isn't some opportunity for future plot there.
They do leave it up to it that way, the way they show.
Back in cryo, even putting Benedict back into, Khan back into cryosleep, that it could be saved for a future plot.
Because we knew Khan was likely never coming back, because he did die in the end of Star Trek II, which I was disappointed about. I think we both were, because he was such a great villain.
Great,
And we do feel like they kind of used up some of their best ideas and kind of ended them too quickly with those original films. But as you can see, in the very end, they do put Khan back into cryosleep very purposefully to show, in case we're going to need him, we can still pull him out.
Right.
And maybe they'll use more of him later on and more of his crew later on, because they did have his crew in the other films. They didn't do a whole lot, but I think they could have been able to bring them back. But that probably would have been one too many characters to keep track of if they would have introduced even more of his crew.
Probably would have. And I was trying to think, was it 72 back in the other? Did they even mention 72 in the original? I couldn't remember. It just seemed odd to me they chose 72.
Yeah, I think it was that way as well. I think they probably, I think I would have actually liked Khan to have been some kind of false prophet figure where he's like, I've come back 300 years later to rectify the world, and I was, kind of like this weird prophecy type thing maybe could have been woven in to it. And they could have, because he was 300-year-old in the 90s, which if you watch the other film during the eugenics war, he was about to conquer the whole world.
Right.
When he realized it wasn't going to go his way. And so him and his crew were put into cryosleep and shipped out into space. But then he's come back. What we get in the story, I think is great and works well, and it's very much streamlined, but I do think that kind of could have been a cool addition. Other than that, I really don't think they made very many mistakes with this film. I think it's incredibly well done, just better than all of the other Star Trek movies we've really seen, especially plot-wise.
Well, not only the plot, even the action. Boy, what an action movie! This had great action. Even the other did too, but this was they to me they took it up a notch. I loved the action.
Oh yeah, the action was absolutely incredible. The space flights when they're trying to outrun 3 birds of prey on the Klingon homeworld, just incredibly exciting. And I gotta say, I love we saw the Klingon homeworld. I love we got to see a new Klingon and an updated kind of bird of prey design. Although I will say, I think the original birds of prey in the other movies looked better.
A little more ominous. They just kind of had a little more wingspan that looked a little more ominous.
They did. These were a little too mechanical, a little too detailed. The other birds of prey had this weird green color to them. So although I did like these ships, I think the original designs were better, and I wish they probably would have kept those. The one thing that I'm not so sure about is switching the roles where Kirk dies instead of Spock. And then they really don't leave you with any suspense, whereas with the search for Spock, between that time gap, there was that suspense. But as we know, Khan's blood apparently has the ability to bring people back to life. Yeah. So they basically just infuse the dead Kirk with Khan's blood, and he's as good as new. I don't know if that's going to make him some kind of superhuman now, but I don't know. I feel like that might have been trying to tie too close back to it, to the original movie, by saying, what if, instead of Spock dying, we may make Kirk die. And they didn't really provide any suspense there. To me, that feels like they're getting a little too close to the other film. Well, Brad, what is your rating and recommendation for Star Trek Into Darkness?
Well, I backed myself into a corner with the last film when I rated it a 10. It's just such a what's the word? I'm reaching for a word here. Just such a feel good series for me. I love Star Trek. That they did such a great job with that. I threw it out there at a 10, and that was kind of my emotional number. Where in the reality, I don't know. I really like this film better, but can't go above a 10. But just barely, I like it better. They're both independently different. That I love them both for their own merits. But I would probably, in retrospect, and this is a retrospective. I should have given the other one a 9 and this one a 10, or the other one an 8 and this one a 9. So it's hard for me to say, but I mean, I'm just going to lay it out there at a 10 again. I guess like the audiences both give them A's. I just love it. Both stand on their own merit.
Star Trek Into Darkness is a powerhouse follow-up to an incredible film. The entire cast and crew has knocked it out of the park once again, and I believe this is even better than the previous Trek film because the villain is more compelling, the story is straightforward, and the character arcs feel earned. Star Trek Into Darkness receives 8 stars out of 10 with a very strong recommend. So I definitely agree with Brad. This is a better Star Trek film, but really not by much. It's a small margin. I really do love that other film and what they're able to do with it as they work together. This is very still much a standalone film, although there are elements that they bring over into one that I think I might not have appreciated this movie as much if I hadn't seen one beforehand.
Absolutely.
Like the relationship with Admiral Pike and
Absolutely.
Kirk.
That's correct.
I think that's really important. And of course, that film really lays the groundwork for these characters. So working together, they're great together, but this film is slightly better. And
when you're making sequels, isn't that what you want? Just one that it's slightly better. You just keep getting a little better every time.
Exactly. And that's just, I think for the first time, they're kind of being able to achieve what Star Wars originally did when Star Wars came out in 1977. And then a few years later, The Empire Strikes Back, which was considered and still is considered a better film.
Yes.
And I think that's what they're able to do here. Now, I am looking forward to reviewing next week Star Trek Beyond.
Yes, it'll be the last of our retrospective series.
It will be the final entry in our Star Trek review series for now.
For now. Do we know if anything's on the horizon?
No movies are currently on the horizon. There are still being talks of a Star Trek 4, which I believe will happen eventually. But it hasn't been that many years since Star Trek 3, considering this took 4 years.
Right.
So, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I think Star Trek Beyond came out in 2016. We'll make sure to be certain on it next week. But so it's been about 3 years. Yeah. So it still hasn't even been the time frame of the other ones. So I'm expecting we may be getting a sequel within a year or two.
Well, they've set a high bar for themselves. So
they've really set a high bar, and you and I have seen Star Trek Beyond only once, but I remember almost next to nothing.
That's the way I was with this one. I mean, I knew afterwards that I had seen it. I remembered, oh yes, I did see this once, but it was at a point where, we just didn't remember. I don't remember Beyond either. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us on our review of Star Trek Into Darkness. We want you to join the conversation with us. So the question after the show is Benedict Cumberbatch a good Khan? Which do you prefer, Ricardo Montalban or Benedict Cumberbatch? Or are they just too different for you to compare? Also, do you think this is a better film than the previous Star Trek movie, kind of like what we thought as well? We want to know what you think, so make sure to leave your comments down below, whether that be here on Podbean or Facebook. You can tweet at us or even email us, and also on YouTube. All of these reviews go up on YouTube, so you can always listen to them over there as well and comment in that section below. I do read your comments, listeners, and I do comment back to you. I love engaging with all of you and hearing your thoughts as well. So don't be afraid to comment, because we will talk back with you. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So if you haven't clicked subscribe yet, don't forget to do that. If you are listening on YouTube, don't forget to click the notification bell, so every time a brand new video comes out, you will always be notified. You'll be the first one to know and be able to check that out. If you are listening on iTunes, we really appreciate it. And go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. No, that's not to inflate our egos. That's to help us be recognized in the rankings, so that other people that are looking for a fun movie review podcast to listen to and a great film community to engage with, it makes it even easier for them to find. And of course, share this with your friends and family so we can just continue to grow the Silver Screen Guide community. Also, don't forget, if you are looking for some even more bonus content, if just one show a week isn't enough for you, then go ahead and head on over to our Patreon page, where that money really does help us out. Buy more bandwidth, buy more storage for the podcast, make the website look even more great. It covers the hosting fees, and you get some really incredible bonus content that is yours to keep. Movie review, trailers, a bonus podcast, movie commentaries, Q&As. You'll find all of that over there on our Patreon page. We made it very easy for you. Just look in the description and you will find all the links you need to connect with us on other platforms as well. Brad, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Corbin, thank you for having me. It's been great. Can't wait for the next one.
I can't wait either, listeners. We will definitely see you next week with Star Trek Beyond.